Welcome to Sex and the Solo Girl. Join your host, her inner circle, and expert guests weekly for chats about dating, secure attachment, the solo lifestyle, doing relationships differently, and of course, sex. And here's your host, Janice Formicella.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sex and the Solo Girl. Very exciting. I am so glad that you followed me over to the new platform. I'm so glad to be welcoming back Laura Grant to the new show. We did an episode on the former platform, Breakups, Broken Hearts, and Moving on Friends with Benefits. And that was a very, very well received episode. And I'm really glad to be having you back now to talk about Solo-Polyamory. So welcome.
I'm so glad you didn't lose my number. This is great. I'm so jazzed to be back.
When we did the other episode, I knew that you were going to be a regular co-host. So I'm really stoked that we're doing this so early on in the new show. And I'm really stoked that you wanted to talk about solo-polyam, which is what my New Zealand friends would say, polyam, which I think is very cute. We're talking about solo-polyamory. Why did this come up as something you wanted to cover so early on?
Well, this is the relationship style that I identify with. And it took me so long to find the language. It took me so long to find resources around it. And, you hear a word and a light bulb goes on. Yeah. And so I just want to tell other people about it so that they can think about all the amazing possibilities that are out there for them. This and everything else, it's just not a one size fits all kind of world.
Hell yeah. And that is one of the top priorities or top missions of this podcast, is to provide a voice and a platform and a fun show for people who do relationships differently or want to do relationships differently. And this is one way of doing that. We will get into both of our stories, but I guess when it comes down to it, this is how I identify as well by definition. So yeah, I'm really excited. All right. Before we get into it, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is how solo polyamory differs from other forms of non-monogamy. So in order to provide some context, why don't we talk about non-monogamy as an umbrella term, and then we'll be able to juxtapose it with the polyam situation.
Whenever you talk about these labels, someone once told me, I wish I remember who, labels are the start of a conversation.
Okay.
So some people really think it's handy to have a label to quickly communicate to other people some concepts, and some people really hate labels, and that's fine too. But I think language can be really powerful when you start thinking about all the diversity in relationships. So I'm glad we're talking about non-monogamy in all its different forms.
Yes, and a lot, especially for people who may be new or think that this is some sort of crazy fringe way of doing things. There is a lot of different ways that people practice it. And there's a lot of ways that may seem more normal than you might believe. So non-monogamy as an umbrella term. We've got swinging, cheating, monogamish, openly dating. These are all ways of being non-monogamous. Let's break it down, Laura.
Great. Yeah. So when we talk about non-monogamy, I think there's a trend right now. Some people like to say ethical non-monogamy, which would be under that umbrella. So there are lots of non-ethical ways to be non-monogamous.
Right.
Cheating is one of them. That would technically be a departure from monogamy. Certainly don't recommend that one, but it does exist. Openly dating around, some people with the goal of being monogamous, some people without the goal of being monogamous. But during that phase of relationships, it would be non-monogamous. Monogamish, which is usually people in a monogamously presenting relationship who have decided to relax those rules a little bit. So they kind of have a foot in each camp. And then we get to polyamory. So that's kind of the openness to multiple overlapping intimate relationships. So usually we're talking a little more about feelings and intimacy and love. People usually contrast that with swinging, which is more open to other physical relationships, open to other sexual relationships, but maybe not emotional relationships.
Yeah.
Whereas polyamory is open to those emotional connections.
And touch on the difference between a polyamorous relationship and an open relationship?
Sure. So usually polyamorous relationships come with a few more, I would say, caveats. Again, it's implied that those emotional and intimate relationships are going to be there, whereas an open relationship, I would say, is maybe more encompassing, where it's going to depart from monogamy in some ways, and it's a little less prescriptive, maybe.
Okay.
I try to make sure none of these terms are prescriptive, but it's just kind of implying that something about the relationship is not closed off and people have more, I say freedom, that might be a little loaded of a term.
Yeah.
But
well, I
little,
mean, it's true.
more flexibility
Yes.
within their relationships. So in polyamory, you can have an open polyamorous relationship where everybody is at liberty to go seek other relationships, or you could have a closed polyamorous relationship, let's say a triad or a quad, where everyone in the relationship is only going to be, lovingly interacting with those same people.
That
So
is
you can have
such
it open or closed.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I've recently had experience with a very closed quad, which I didn't really realize was closed, and I think maybe some of them didn't either. But it is, yeah, like what we were saying earlier, is there's so many different ways to do non-monogamy, and technically, these four people are all completely committed to just each other. It's still technically non-monogamous, but very, very committed little circle of people who are not all out there, doing their own thing necessarily the way that I believe some people perceive non-monogamy to be. And it's one way of doing it that works for a lot of people and makes people feel, yeah, really confident and satisfied and fulfilled in life and love.
Love that.
But yeah, for others, yes, you're going to be actively all dating other people, and that's also very fulfilling.
So then we have solo polyamory. So we had the big umbrella, non-monogamy.
Okay.
And then under that, we've got polyamory, which is itself has many different aspects. You can be closed, you can be open, polyamorous. And then solo polyamory. So that's really embracing one's autonomy and kind of rejecting the enmeshment or merging of lives, of your life's infrastructure. So things like living arrangements, finances, parenting, and I think maybe even more important is rejecting the enmeshment of identities. My friend Amy Guerin loves to say, not losing the me in the we.
Okay.
So, when you think about traditional couples who've been together a long time, you're like, oh, come to my house for dinner. Oh, I don't know if we're free. We'll get back to you.
Yep.
Or, so it's really, that becomes part of their identity. And there's nothing wrong with that, certainly. But solo polyamorous usually, whether or not they're in relationships or how many relationships they're in, the relationship with self is very important and remains very important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, being your own soulmate and prioritizing yourself as your own partner above everything else is one reason why I identify this way. And that is definitely how I view my relationships. It's first me and myself, and then the other people who I might choose to involve in it. But it always will come down when I make decisions as like what is best for me and what's best for the relationship that I have with myself.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, I think for you and me, what I'm hearing you say is it's an identity.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's just a circumstance, right? I happen to be in a relationship that looks like solo polyamory, and maybe it's temporary, or maybe I don't even know how I identify. I'm figuring out how I identify. Maybe this is a real departure for me and I'm trying something new. And then there's some people where their circumstance might look just like a traditional monogamous marriage, but they really identify as solo polyamorous. Maybe they're married to one person, but they are certainly open to other overlapping intimate relationships. And they think of themselves as a solo person, even though everyone from the outside looking in, it's like, oh, you look like a monogamous person in a heterosexual marriage. It's like, so the circumstance and the identity don't inherently always have to mirror each other perfectly. And that still means you can identify that way.
That's so interesting. And have you known of people in that type of circumstance? I'm sitting here thinking about my own life and the people I know and even my own relationships. So you know someone who was in a heterosexual marriage who may have still identified as solo polyamorous?
Sure. And this happens with a lot of different labels. So, a bisexual person who's only dating one person. Oh, well, you're not really bisexual, you're just gay or you're just straight, because I, from the outside, am looking at you and seeing only one partner and putting you in that box and assigning you that label, where you can still identify as and be bisexual even if you're only dating one person. It's the same thing with solo polyamory. Oh, maybe I went through a series of breakups and now I have no partners at all, or my marriage was dissolved or something, and now I still identify as solo polyamorous, but I have 0 partners. That doesn't have to impact your identity just because your circumstance has changed. I had a friend who figured out that she was asexual and was struggling with her lesbian identity. She's like, well, I'm not, when I think of the lesbian identity, it's very inherently linked to attraction and sex, which now I'm not really interested in. Am I allowed to still be and identify as lesbian? These are things people struggle with when they have a foot in 2 camps, or, they're doing something that doesn't fit the stereotype of these labels, which is so ironic because these are things that are departing from the norm. And yet people are like, oh, now I have a new norm. I've decided a new label fits. But if I depart from that at all, then I panic a little bit. Can I still use that label?
I went through this recently completely. I don't always use the term solo polyamorous. I do always consider myself to be solo. Laura and I are part of a movement or a community that's just called the solo movement or the solo community. And so I have always said either solo or single at heart. And that is because I refuse to ride the relationship escalator, which Laura and I will talk about. I love living alone. These types of merging situations are not at all a priority for me. I'm extremely independent. I take a lot of pride in saying that I'm solo. However, recently I had started seeing someone and just had such a strong desire to just become closer to like this one person. And all of a sudden I'm like, is this still my identity? Like what does this mean? And yes, it is important to just remind yourself that these things are a little fluid and not to get, like so caught up in it, and enjoy the moment and also allow yourself to, I guess, be open to new experiences. But also I had to sit down with myself and say, like within this relationship, like really what are my goals? What are my values? What are my priorities? And when it comes down to it, it's still the same. I still want to get close with this person, but don't think of it as a relationship escalator. I think of kind of like a bit of a plateau where you just strengthen the relationship without really worrying about the expectations and the outcomes and the merging. And it's still, my same values and priorities.
Love it.
So Laura, actually, this brings up a good point. Why don't we talk really quickly about the relationship escalator? Because this is fundamental when it comes to solo polyamory. For me, this is one of the most fundamental aspects of why it is that I identify this way. And that is because, I reject these types of notions and these types of structures and societal expectations. Can you please let us know what the relationship escalator is and why this is germane to the conversation around solo polyamory?
Sure. So the relationship escalator is this huge bundle of social norms that we have pertaining to what a relationship should look like and what you, dear listener, all of you should want and be pursuing. And if you aren't pursuing it, and if you don't want it, and if you don't have it, there's probably something wrong with you. And so the relationship escalator is saying that our romantic relationships need to be constantly moving towards the next big milestone. So if you're dating, it's because you want to start dating someone seriously, start dating them exclusively, move in together, that you, of course, want to get married, have children, and that this entire if you stall out at any of these milestones or part ways, then the entire thing was a failure the whole time.
Yep.
So
unless you unless someone dies. That's what Peter likes to say.
That's a success.
It's a failure unless one of you dies. So no redefining the relationship, no designing it in a different way, no staying together really at all.
Yep, the happily ever after of
Right.
the, Disney industrial relationship complex. That's,
Yes.
that's a relationship escalator. And you know what? People who are polyamorous still want that, and that's fine. That's great.
True. Some polyamorous individuals absolutely stay on the escalator. The escalator, I don't necessarily conflate the two with each other at all.
Right.
I mean, this is a lifestyle choice that you can make even if you are monogamous, I suppose, and just want to have one partner. You could still say that you still don't want to ride the relationship escalator. It's a value and it's an alternative, way of seeing things. And yes, it's not, the two are not mutually exclusive at all.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you so much. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about our own stories? We've said that we both identify this way. So let's touch on that. And then we're going to just really dive into the ins and outs of what this means, how you live it, how you can make it work for you, for lack of a better way of phrasing things. And I mean, even talking about maybe if you identify as solo polyamorous, but your partners don't. There is a whole lot of juiciness for this conversation. Laura, when did you begin to identify this way? I mean, if anyone is doing it, you are. So let's hear about it.
Oh yeah, I've been at this a while, and I talked before about the power of language. For me, I was living my life as best I could, and someone introduced me to the term.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, that's me. That's how I'm doing this. So for me, my path to non-monogamy in general was one of not wanting to feel limited by my interpersonal relationships. And every time I would get into a monogamous romance with someone, I would start to feel the walls closing in, and I would feel like I didn't have as much opportunity to live my life, and I felt like options were closed off to me. And not everybody feels that way. Some people feel really liberated and supported and uplifted by monogamous relationships and feel really safe and wonderful and cherished. And so those are the kind of people who should be monogamous. And I was not feeling that way. So, tried to assess, well, when am I happiest in relationships? And it's when I was putting myself out there in the world, trying to find new people to date and potentially fall in love with, and just being open to all the possibilities that came with. And so I was like, maybe I just need to do that forever, just date around perpetually. And so I did that for a while. It was super fun, and then fell in love again. And the person was like, all right, we're in love now. Let's take this to the next step of the relationship escalator. Let's declare ourselves exclusive. Let's,
oh my God, when was this?
Deepen this. This was, about 10 years ago now.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're dating around, but I guess would you say, and this might come up later in the conversation because I think this might be a misnomer about solo polyamory, but at the time, would you say that you were kind of intentionally not really letting yourself get too emotionally invested or too close with the people you were dating?
I was trying. It turns out you can't actually control your emotions like that. So I did fall for this guy, and I was like, hey, I also want to deepen this relationship with you. I think you're amazing. We're having a great time. I don't want this to end, but I just can't do the exclusivity thing.
Okay.
And I expected a rejection, and I didn't get it. He was like, well, that's a little scary, but we can try it.
Oh, love it.
And so the door opened, and through that relationship, and then talking to other people and getting some language, and then once you have the language, you can find the resources and the books and joining the groups and learning from other people who have been doing this for decades. And I was on my way. And as far as solo is concerned, I mean, just always feeling like all the possibilities were open to me.
Yeah.
And that I was always at liberty to do what felt right for me in my relationships kind of helped me gravitate towards a more solo identity.
So would you say for the last decade that you've identified this way and practiced solo polyamory?
I would definitely say I practiced it, but coming to the solo polyamory language was a little later, and then being
Okay.
like, oh yeah, that does explain, like, oh, there are other people who have put some thought into this, and it all really jives with the way I'm living and the way I see myself.
Which is good because more and more people are starting to have non-monogamous relationships, and it's really good that there are wealth of resources so that people know that you can do it the way that feels right and resonant for you. My story is actually completely different. I became non-monogamous through being just exposed to people in the poly lifestyle and the poly community, and just ultimately finding that it felt very uplifting for me. And I just thought these people have it going on and I want to be a part of this. I thought it was just everyone who I knew. Well, okay, definitely shouldn't say that. A lot of the people I knew in the community just seemed very happy, and I was in a beautiful situation where I was like immediately became really close friends with a bunch of my metamors and just met some really wonderful men. So that's how I first became non-monogamous. How I became solo polyamorous though was because my last relationship when I was living in Australia, so this would have been about 6 years ago, was a polyamorous relationship. He was married, he dated around, I dated around, but then when we met, we kind of decided, we're going to focus on each other, which that is, I think, still how I do things. When I connect with someone, I kind of want to build a foundation. And that's what I did. I really found that I lost myself in the relationship. Like the closer we got, the closer I wanted to get, and just starting to, I guess, sacrifice a lot of what made me me just for the sake of the relationship. I fell very, very deeply in love with this person. And when it all fell apart, I was shattered beyond belief. And I came back to myself and I said, this is not how I want to be in relationships. This is not how I want to travel through life. When I connect with someone, I want to stay true to myself in the future. And so not only do I need to figure out new ways to do relationships and non-monogamy, I need to take a break. No more.
Whoa, what a concept.
So I took several years off of dating, sex, relationships, and just committed to building the relationship I have with myself. And then in the end of those several years, I'm always so sheepish about saying how long it was because it was a really long time. I figured out that this was how I want it to be. That I don't want the relationship escalator. That I will continue to check in with myself when I'm in new relationships to make sure that it's still really all about me in the end. And that while I do really want to begin to connect with people, I have to make myself, the center of my own galaxy. And also, I have to just say, I just love my life and love living by myself and love the fact that I make all my decisions on my own. And it's just kind of organically happened. And I will say, I do feel like a very limitless sense of freedom, being able to not only connect with multiple people, but just, know that there's also not going to be the boundaries that I kind of fear and reject. Yeah. So that's me.
Love it.
And and I do date and, have someone in my life who I care deeply about. But I also will say, and I think maybe we'll get into this, I feel like it makes all your relationships better as well. You don't rely on people for certain things that can get in the way of the connection in the way that I used to. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And I would say, as with just finding what works for you and living your most authentic self, whatever that looks like, you're going to show up better.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're showing up in such a great, authentic way.
Thank you. I think so. And I'm really thankful for the journey of getting to this point. I wouldn't say everybody needs to take years off of relationships, but for me, getting to the point where I am, it was absolutely worth it. And if anybody wants to hear more and wants, to kind of be coached through this process, please get in touch. That's what I do. So let's move on to the ins and outs of solo polyamory. I put in my notes, what is the solo polyamory thing anyway? So, Laura, we touched on it, but let's get into it. So, what are we really talking about, maybe that we haven't already said?
Um, Something I like to talk about is maybe you're hearing about this for the first time, or maybe a light bulb's going on for you, or maybe you're super skeptical about it. That's great too. What a next step might be, how to get involved, how to learn more,
Okay.
right? So I would say if you're interested in doing something new, learn from others who are already doing it. And I feel like in relationships, we don't take the time to do that a lot.
Okay.
So if I want to learn to play piano, I'm going to go find a piano teacher. I'm not going to join a band. Right?
Okay.
But if someone's like, "Oh, polyamory, solo polyamory, that sounds fun. I'm going to start doing it immediately." Again, I quote my friend Amy Guerin a lot. She says, "Other people's hearts are not your crash test dummies." So certainly experience is a wonderful, amazing teacher. And maybe you've been on this path already and are just finding language and want to keep going. And that's wonderful. But there are awesome community groups out there, in person, virtual. Maybe you're in a community where this feels really out there in left field. This feels really like a big risk. It's really nice that there are virtual communities you can join, and groups you can call into to learn more, and podcasts you can listen to in the privacy of your own home to learn more about this. But yeah,
So
lots
yeah,
of
let's break that
resources.
down a little. Keep your eye on this space. I will be talking about solo polyamory on this podcast a lot because I talk about my life on this podcast a lot. So there's this podcast, and I mean the go-to for sure, Multiamory is an amazing resource if either you're new to non-monogamy, want to learn more about solo polyamory, or anything about doing relationships a little bit differently. That would be my favorite resource. And then as far as online communities, what can you suggest?
Well, so I'm in the Denver, Colorado area. I love the Boulder Polyamory Meetup group. There's Denver Metro Polyamory group. There's a nonprofit called Loving More. And the thing I really love about these communities is there are newbies there who need the support, and then there are people who've been doing this for decades
Okay.
and are still taking the time to learn more and to think about ways that they can show up as their best selves in relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
just seeing that commitment to being better and to helping other people be better is really inspiring to me.
Well, and it's necessary as well. I mean, when you're non-monogamous and you are bringing in different people and changing the dynamics in your relationships, sometimes quite constantly. I mean, by necessity, you need to continue to learn how to navigate it. I don't think that it ever gets to the point where there aren't things that you need to either learn or do better or adjust. And so, yeah, that is extremely admirable. I think that's also a misnomer just about polyamory in general, is that somehow we are not people who experience jealousy and sadness and anger and all of the things that come up in relationships. And no, we do. We just have different ways of processing and navigating them. And it takes a lot of work. And that's another reason why I am so drawn to non-monogamy is for me, it has me constantly reevaluating how I show up for myself and others.
Yeah, and I think there's something really refreshing about any person, any group of people who are doing something really intentionally.
Yeah.
Whether it's the norm, whether it's departing from the norm, whatever, people are saying, "Hey, I was not taught this was a model, and I found it, and now I'm really making the conscious decision to apply myself and to do things this way." Or maybe they said, "Hey, I educated myself on all these other ways of doing it, and I just want to be monogamous and get married." Great.
Yeah.
And then be intentional about it rather than just defaulting
Yes.
to whatever your parents did or whatever the movies told you should do.
Or now that we're in a relationship, we're just going to default to kind of going through the motions and not, continually seeing, checking in about how we're doing and how the other person is experiencing it and what the health of our connection actually is. And I mean, when it comes to divorce, I would say that is one of the big reasons why it happens is, people don't continue to be intentional about being wonderful for each other. So I think we've established what it is, and you touched a little bit on this, but I mean, who would you maybe encourage to explore this a little bit more?
I would say if you have a really strong sense of self and really value your autonomy, that's a really great place to start. This might really work for you. If you don't think of yourself as incomplete without a partner.
Yay.
And so again, we talk a lot about being solo, whether it's in or out of relationships, and kind of these are some of the defining characteristics that we're talking about here. Maybe you have other, that you value relationships, certainly, but a diverse set where you don't necessarily want to place a romantic relationship as having greater status in your life than others, like your friendships, like your family relationships, like your professional relationships.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of skeptical about that whole romantic partners are the most important thing and the most important and therefore, worthy forms of relationship, if that seems a little suspect to you, maybe investigate.
And I think that that's going to be that's going to be a new way for a lot of people listening to think about relationships. And we will come back on and talk about, I don't know what's the best way to say this other than relationship energy, which I think this term is just losing steam. But
oh, we forgot that one under the big old non-monogamy umbrella.
But I think there's a better ways to describe it that will resonate with more people. Don't you?
Yeah, I think relationship design is what our friend Peter McGraw likes to say. Just really bespoke, each relationship tailor-made for the people in it.
Yes, lovely.
I am passionate about the opportunity that a breakup gives us for a fresh start, but it can sure be hard to see that when you're heartbroken, right? I have worked with people all around the world to beat their breakups with my own 3-part process. I've created an ebook that guides readers through each step using practical advice straight from an experienced breakup coach. Click on the link at the top of the show notes and get your copy of the Broken Heart Repair Kit, the 3-step method for beating your breakup, at my special Sex and the Solo Girl release price of just $24.99. And remember, you've got this.
Let's touch on the fact that some people listening do have a deep desire for connection and romantic partnership. What does it look like to welcome that and design that in your life whilst still considering yourself to be solo polyamorous, single at heart, solo, whatever? I mean, I know for me what it looks like, but I would love to hear from you because I don't want people listening to think that this means that you don't have meaningful connections.
Yeah, and there are some common misconceptions about solo polyamory. I want to talk maybe about some of them later, but that's a big one, is that solo polyamorists are selfish or that they fear commitment. And that's just not true. We're talking about making multiple commitments. So you're really gonna have to be comfortable with commitment, right? If you're not only getting into one romantic relationship, if you're open to the idea of multiple, that's a lot of commitment. But we're also saying you're making a very conscious commitment to yourself in addition. So it's balancing that almost as if it's yet another relationship. And it is, definitely looks different, the relationship with oneself, but saying all of these relationships are important to me. In order to show up as my best self, I need to make sure I'm taken care of and that I'm being authentic to myself, that I'm setting all the right boundaries. And you would want to do this in any relationship, no matter how you identify, right? And then being able to have that security in yourself and have that kind of great stepping off point, having your feet really under you in a way that allows you to show up for other people. Because there's no relationships without interdependence. That's just what we do. We're social creatures. And so this is not going to limit the depths of your commitment. It's not going to limit the depths of your emotion for these people. It's just balancing that with yet another commitment to yourself.
I love it. This makes me think of, I mean, one of the benefits of my own life has been that I do have deep connections with female friends who I am able to show up hella lot. I actually, one of my closest friends, Christine Lalonde from 50 Shades of Bullshit, shout out. She got unexpectedly evicted about 6 months or so ago.
Oof.
And partially because of this lifestyle, if not completely because of this lifestyle, I actually went and stayed in Burbank for over 3 weeks helping her move. And I just said, when she told me this was happening to her, I said, I am committing, I am coming over there. We are going to tackle this together. And it really helped her out a lot, obviously. But it also made me really thankful for the fact that, I didn't have to turn around and get permission or make this decision with other people, and that I was able to show her that I prioritize her, just as much as anything else.
Right. Love it. And it doesn't mean you totally cut and ran on all your other life commitments.
Oh, no.
But, you had communicated up front that this is the kind of thing you want the flexibility to be able to do, and you've arranged your life around that. So yeah, I think that's wonderful.
Lara, in retrospect, is there an experience that you had where you were able to look back and think that you were really grateful for yourself and the decisions that you made about your lifestyle because of a door that it opened for you, or an opportunity or experience it provided?
There are so many, but really one that sticks with me is looking back before I knew this about myself and seeing things that could have gone differently. So I was very much in love with someone, and we moved in together, and we were very excited, and it was like, we're in this for the long haul. And turns out I'm not a good roommate.
Okay.
And so we had this lovely romance. We had this lovely companionship, and we were horrible housemates. But I was on that relationship escalator. I thought that, it was a unavoidable milestone to move in together, and it clearly failed. And so therefore the entire relationship had failed. And so we broke up. And now I look back and wonder, hey, if in my relationships now, I'm very upfront about not wanting to commingle my housing situation with a romantic partner. I need the physical space. I need the emotional space. It's just not something I'm interested in doing. And that's probably allowed me to have such better relationships because no one had to put up with me as a horrible roommate.
That's it. Wow. See, and I guess that would go back to partially, as far as the living situation goes, that really mirrors how I can be in relationships and how I was when I was with this man in Australia. And that is, when I live with people, when I have flatmates, I do the same thing. I completely lose myself. I bend over backwards for everybody to either make sure that I don't step on toes, or that everyone is just constantly happy with me, or that I can avoid confrontation, I lose myself and lose sight completely of what I might want in my living situation. And if you saw my apartment, you would know I'm in the exact opposite situation. I've got the cutest place in the entire world, and this is it's actually an extension, I think, of me as a person, is this apartment. And so I that resonates with me quite a bit, and that is also why I wouldn't really consider living with someone. I don't know why people do that, to be honest. It sounds horrible.
Yeah, other people are so great at it. I am definitely not.
Oh yeah, it's so
not
fascinating. And then I want to keep putting this out there, and that is, I have become really interested in the living together apart movement or option.
Oh, yeah.
If there's anyone out there who considers themselves to be an expert in this area, please get in touch. I want to do an episode on it, but I'm actually having a really hard time finding anyone who wants to come on and talk about it. So I think that that's another wonderful, wonderful option. There are even people who consider themselves to be completely monogamous who are living together apart. I want to talk about it. So please hit me up. All right. How do we make solo polyamory work? I'm going to go to you and I'll interject if I have any other tips.
Let's see. Here's another one. Be really clear and communicate that that's what you want as early as possible. And this is a mistake that I 100% made, and that I see a lot of people who are new to polyamory specifically, but really any kind of new relationship style, or, you know, who want to depart from the norm in any way. Maybe they're into kink, maybe they're into something else. Putting it out there as soon as possible is going to allow you to be your own filter and not waste your time and other people's time. And the reason I think for me that was difficult is because when you're departing from the norm, all of a sudden your dating pool gets so much smaller. And that feels so much more difficult, especially if you're doing the online dating thing and it's a numbers game. And so if I immediately cut out the majority of people from my dating pool, that feels really hard. But guess what? Most of those people don't want what you want. So why would you try to date them, right? Just find the people who already know they're interested in what you're interested in.
When it comes to making sure that, as you say, put it out there and communicate this as early as possible, what exactly do you feel needs to be communicated?
So I usually try to mention that I'm non-monogamous or polyamorous as soon as I can.
Okay, gotcha.
And to just state it matter-of-factly, if you make a big deal out of it, other people will make a big deal out of it. Not everyone knows what it is, so you might have to explain. That's fine. It's a lot easier if you're, again, I do a lot of online dating. That's really easy because you have a profile that someone's going to see. There are certain dating websites that are better than others about having these filters and allowing you to kind of self-identify in that way right up front. So that people who are not looking for that won't even see you, won't even waste their time.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Another thing is creating space for renegotiation, especially if you're trying something new, right? You might not be able to predict how you're actually going to feel when you start doing it. So you might be listening to me and Janice here and getting really excited and think this is for you. I just allow yourself to be right about that, allow yourself to be wrong about that, and to say, all right, this is what I thought I wanted, this is what I told you I wanted, and I'm now having feelings that I didn't anticipate. I'm now finding out that maybe this isn't the right choice for me and I want to change directions, and being really clear and opening up that renegotiation instead of saying, well, I said it's what I wanted and I hate it, but that's what I said I was going to do, so I should follow through. Don't do that to yourself. But at the same time, don't unilaterally change the rules and expect other people to respond, because if that's what someone else was looking for and you figure out you can't actually offer that, you need to be clear about that as well.
Absolutely. You are allowed to change your mind when it comes to relationships and how you interact with people and really anything in life. You're allowed to change your mind. But you must remember that when it comes to all relationships, non-monogamy, particularly, like maybe especially, we're talking about agreements that are between two and sometimes more people, and they are just that agreement. You can change your mind, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't an agreement and that there's going to be discussions and fallout and things to navigate, which I think is the word of the episode. Everyone take a drink.
Yeah, I love that. You can't say, I know I told you I wanted to be polyamorous, but I don't like it, so we're monogamous now. Yeah. That's just not right.
Or that, I was cool with this person and now I'm not, or any number of things. And that's why I said the better communicator you can be, the happier you are going to be and the happier everyone else is going to be. So invest in yourself, everyone. Let's talk about expectations when you are in relationships. I suppose expectations with yourself, expectations with your partners. Something that came up in my research was the idea that if you are solo polyamorous, you might not have as much of a right to make requests of your partners and ask still to be prioritized and scheduled in and this type of thing. I reject that. What do you have to say?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. So when you talk about that, to me, it sounds like the common thing that solo polyamorists avoid, not always, but frequently, is hierarchical relationships.
Yep.
So in contrast to egalitarian relationships. So first of all, what does that mean? You know, we talked about the relationship escalator. We are deeply entrenched as a culture in this couples privilege. It's a very couple centric, there's a lot of pressure to say one relationship is intrinsically more important and thus carries more power than other relationships, and it's non-reciprocal, right? So there's disproportionate power when you're talking about multiple relationships. We've all seen this where your friend starts a new romantic relationship and they disappear. And then maybe a few months later they pop up, I had a breakup, please comfort me. And we're all expected to go along with that because that's the normal narrative, that you would get completely ditched when your friend finds a romantic relationship. Well, in polyamory, you're dealing with multiple romantic and emotional relationships, and that hierarchy can still be there. Culture that we live in. So I don't want to say that hierarchical relationships are inherently bad. I want to say it's much more challenging to do it ethically and to treat everyone well. It's not impossible. Some people do it and love it. But as a solo polyamorist, because I'm not interested in enmeshing my life with other people, I'm probably not going to be that primary partner.
Yeah. Some are, but this is such a cool discussion. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Again, it's possible, but if you're following defaults and maybe not as aware that this is happening and maybe not as intentional, it's easy to fall into that secondary, tertiary, whatever non-primary relationship in this hierarchy of relationships. And then it does, that means that someone in that primary relationship, your metamor that you don't even personally have a relationship with, has power over your own relationship. So that can be very uncomfortable for some people. And if that's the kind of situation that you want to get into, you have to be really clear about that. And have a lot of self-awareness about it.
Yeah.
We talk about sneakyarchy, where, oh no, we're totally egalitarian, totally. But, if my wife feels uncomfortable, I'm just not going to call you anymore. It can sneak in there because it's so deeply entrenched in our culture. It's sometimes hard to see.
And
so
these are things that are really, these are intense emotions, or these are intense conversations that involve very intense emotions. And I do think that some people aren't ready to do it. And when things come up, that can happen. And even if you think you totally are in the moment, you can escape under pressure, I suppose.
Right. And, you might be thinking, well, it's Laura, you're ridiculous. There's no way that a lady I just picked up at a bar is going to have the same relationship with me as my, husband of 20 years. And having an egalitarian relationship style doesn't mean that all relationships are equal.
Yeah.
It means that everyone has the power to make the agreements in their own relationships, to set their own boundaries and have them respected. That problem solving is done situationally.
Yes,
so,
thank you.
Yeah, if you have children who need you, I would expect that to be a huge priority in your life. And if I'm like, hey, I'm lonely, come hang out with me, you're like, I can't have to take my child to the doctor. That's totally reasonable. That's situationally appropriate based on those relationships and the needs of the people in them. Again, it doesn't mean that you would always drop everything for me, or you would always drop everything for your children, or this or that. It just means that we've all made agreements that work for us, and we're all working together to make sure we're in the right relationship for us.
Ah, beautiful. This is why I love non-monogamy so much. I think this is so juicy. I think it's such a elevated way to interact in the world. So I know that's controversial. My heart, I guess, when we talk about these types of things, it swells a little. And I think it's just really beautiful. And I think that there's so many opportunities for expanded intimacy when you are allowing yourself to have these conversations, and when you're allowing yourself to, traverse some pretty tricky situations. I think that you can get closer with your partners, and that it adds just so much depth to life. What I also wanted to say is, when it comes to where you fit inside of a partnership or a network, which is really what it often is in non-monogamy, if you identify as solo polyamorous, you are still quote unquote allowed to have needs, wants, and desires and communicate those to the people you are seeing. So that looks different for everyone. You know, for me, it may just asking, I want to see you one night a week, just things that come up for me that make me feel valued, or just simply that I want. You know, I'm seeing someone, and you're allowed to make requests.
Yes, definitely. That's important, and you deserve to have the relationship that works for you. If anyone's doesn't know that, you do deserve it.
And this does not mean that you do not have relationships. It means that they just look differently and perhaps are more rich. When it comes to navigating maybe a longer term relationship, we've definitely talked about what to do in a new relationship and making sure that you communicate certain things and know yourself first. What about once things start getting a little more serious?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I kind of want to also start talking about kind of the challenges and potential pitfalls and things that might be difficult about this lifestyle. And you just mentioned one, is that things do change over time. People change, situations change. So when you think about levels of commitment, and again, that relationship escalator, it's really easy when you first meet someone to say, oh, I don't want to move in with you. And they're like, of course not. We just met. I've known you for 2 minutes. I don't want to get married. Well, of course not. Like, we're still, haven't even reached the bottom of our first cup of coffee together. Those things seem obvious. I'm totally on board. But when you've been dating for 3, 4, 10, 15 years, and you're getting more and more social pressure or family pressure to say, well, you've been together so long, shit or get off the pot, right? Like, what are you even doing with your life if you're not making a more formal, outward presenting commitment? And so there's more pressure as it goes. The other thing we need to talk about is just changing of situation. Let's say one of you experiences housing insecurity, loss of employment, right? Okay. A change in your health, something big. Well, society would say, why don't you just move in with your boyfriend? You've been dating 15 years. What's your problem? It's instantly solve all your problems. And you're like, I don't identify, like, that is not something I want in this relationship. I've been clear with my partner that is not something we will move towards in this relationship. And now all of a sudden there's another factor at play, right? And so things are constantly changing in every relationship and with every person. So that's something to think about. And also keeping in mind, we talked about before, your circumstance doesn't dictate your identity.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because it is so intrinsically still this discussion about whether or not, what if your circumstances change, goes still back to the societal norms and expectations that moving in together will solve the problem. You know what I mean? Like, right. It's so hard to get away from these assumptions, I think, in paradigms.
Right, exactly. And, you have other options. Maybe you have other options where, let's say you're experiencing housing insecurity and you choose to move in with a family member. And people are like, well, what happened to your significant other? Did that relationship end? Yeah. Oh, no, we're still very much in love and still very much committed to each other. Well, why didn't you move in with them? Mm-hmm. Is that relationship on the rocks? You're not listening, So yep. There's a lot of pressure there from the outside, and maybe that has been internalized too. That's always a danger.
Oh, it so is, and it's hard. I mean, especially you have undoubtedly experienced this. Just even you're getting so close with someone and really developing something special, and you still have people who are not non-monogamous, who do not believe that what you were experiencing is as deep and meaningful as it is. I even had someone recently say that I would be monogamous if I met the right person. I am like, fuck off. Why? You have no idea what my life is about.
Yeah.
And it's disheartening. And I do
yes.
want to put that out there. And, you are the only one having your experience, but I would be prepared for that because it's a bummer.
And we talked a little bit about misconceptions about solo polyamorous, like they're selfish or fear commitment, that we're hermits, that we have, inherently we must have avoidant attachment styles, every single one of us. And even, when people hear that I'm non-monogamous, that I'm trying to steal your partner. That's another thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Oh, I guess. Oh, yeah. Okay. I had someone recently. So I was in a workshop for relationship coaching recently, and someone said that polyamorous people have unexplored attachment issues. And this is why they cannot connect fully just with one person. And they need then to connect with multiple people. And I'm like, I'm going to stab a bitch.
Yeah. And, they don't say that about people who get married and then get divorced in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
They don't
or
talk
cheat,
about that.
or just live a
cheat,
loveless,
or
sexless marriage.
Right. Meanwhile, I've been in some of my relationships for multiple years, like
That's
deep
great.
committed relationships, but no, still I'm a Peter Pan or whatever the case may be.
You know what? Live your life, people. Try not to let the haters hate. Okay, some of the challenges. Let's get a little deeper into this. Laura, how can a person who wants to explore solo polyamory protect themselves and look after themselves and make sure that they're having their needs met, and maybe make sure that, we all get burned here and there, but yeah, what are some, I guess, best practices just as far as looking after oneself while connecting with people and trying this out maybe for the first time?
Love it. The first thing and the hardest thing, the life's journey for us all, is to have self-awareness, right? So if you struggle with codependence, this might not be a starting point for you. This might be a goal. This might be a good way to work on some of those issues. The self-reliance and the willingness to be alone if you need to not fear being alone is part of that leaping off point.
Oh man. And if you fear being alone or are struggling to overcome loneliness, not only go into my backlog of episodes, because this is a particular interest of mine, focus there first. I think if you struggle with feelings of loneliness and fear around being alone, don't even do any of this right now. Focusing on that and your relationship with self and learning to be your own best company will change your life. It will change your relationships. It will make all of this way more fun and joyful. And yeah, start there. Okay, listen to the rest of this episode, but go and learn how to, like I said, be your own best company before you start bringing other people into it. Other people aren't a Band-Aid.
Love that. Yeah. And sometimes, anytime you're trailblazing in any way, and it feels a little weird to use that term because lots of people are doing this. There are books written about it. There are podcasts. There are, TV shows now. It's becoming more and more normalized, but it still feels like there are fewer role models. There are fewer models in general for how to do this right, how to do this ethically, how to make it work for you. And that can be uncomfortable. So just being secure in that, or being willing to dig a little deeper for resources. Not impossible. We live in the information age, but it's a lot harder. There are fewer scripts.
And there's lots of coaches out there. I work with people as a dating and relationship coach, and really, really want to connect with more people who want to learn how to navigate non-monogamy and solo living. So please be in touch. We'll have a blast together. Should we talk a little bit about, I know, Laura, that you wanted to talk about the issue of, I guess, like we keep on saying, how this is perceived. And you wanted to touch on the issue of ableism and solo polyamory, which I'm really glad for because I would have never thought to touch on that.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing it up. So ableism, that's the discrimination in favor of able-bodied people, right? And with solo polyamory, it's often portrayed in an ableist fashion when it's prescribing, if you want to be solo polyamorous, you must live alone, have your own place. Well, not everyone can do that. You must be financially independent. Yeah, not everyone is. You can't get married. Well, marriage carries tons of government sanctioned incentives that some people like rely on for survival, right?
Mm-hmm.
So independence is a privilege for many people. And so I just want to reiterate that your life can look different and you can still identify as solo polyamory, and your life can change. Maybe today you have your own place and your own finances and you're completely independent, and maybe that will change in the future. Doesn't mean you have to give up your solo polyamory card. So again, it's really a collection of shared attitudes that solo polyamorous have about the role of their relationships in their lives. It's not necessarily a checklist of things you have to do in order to make the grade. Right?
Yes. And that's also why when it comes to identity and labels, yes, they are great for starting discussions, and finding resources. But, like, let's only cling to these things so rigidly.
Right, exactly.
And especially if you're non-monogamous, I mean, that's the point. I mean, there's supposed to be wiggle room and different ways of exploring things, and give yourself the same grace.
Love that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is so much fun. Okay, so we're exploring solo polyamory. Someone might be new to it. Someone might not even realize that they're doing it, which I think that would be, pretty cool to be like, oh, cool. My life is awesome. What else do people need to consider here?
Yeah, just opt in to the life you want. Don't default to what you've been told to do.
All right, let's say that one more time, girl. I'm writing it down into the life you want. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Investigate everything you've been taught, unlearn things that don't serve you. I think I've said that before on your podcast. And if you really look within and look at all the diversity of options you have, whatever conclusion you reach is going to be better. Even if it looks exactly the same as what you were doing yesterday, you will be able to be more committed to it. You'll be able to know that you're living more authentically. And then the last thing I would say is, if you're doing something that departs from the norm, be as out as you can be. Help us normalize all of these beautiful ways of living.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for saying that. And just say it again, please. You're blowing my mind right now. I never really think, we were just saying during the break about it is so hard to know how to create like an informational discussion around these things that you completely take for granted. And yeah, that's something that I wouldn't really have thought to use my platform to encourage people to do, but it is so important. I mean, that's why I have my platform. That's why I am doing this. So can you say that one more time?
Yeah, be as out as you can be about whatever weird, glorious, lovely thing you're doing in life that departs from the norm. Because the more that you normalize it, the more people are going to see that they have options, that they can opt into the life they want. You're going to help them. You're going to help make the world safer for them, because, departing from the norm is not safe in every community. And there's still so much work to be done there. So be as out as you can be about being, your glorious weirdo self and letting your freak flag fly.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to everybody who is flying a freak flag. Let's do it together. This was a very special discussion for me. And please, anybody, be in touch if you want resources, if you want to explore coaching around these things. If there is a topic that you would like Laura and I to take another deep dive into, please be in touch. All of my information is in the show notes. She will be back regularly. What are you curious about? Was there something that we talked about today that you'd like us to go deeper into? Is there something funky, freaky, or fun that you're curious about when it comes to, different ways of doing things? We're the people to break it down for you. So be in touch, and we will definitely probably do it. Let's talk about anything.
Yeah, sounds like us.
Thank you so much. And I just want to leave us with what Laura said earlier. Opt into the life you want. And I'm wishing everyone so much fun doing that. I think that this is really going to open a world of possibilities that maybe you didn't know were even out there. So with that, I'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Sex and the Solo Girl with Janice Formicella, the podcast for those who want to add more flavor to their relationships with themselves and others. If you liked today's episode, make sure to head over to Instagram and let her know. See you next week.